What historical famous person wasn't actually a huge piece of shit? Genghis Khan. Yes, there was a murdering, raping, and torturing, but as I understand it, not a historian. He deliberately promoted his reputation of savagery to discourage opponents from fighting, thus reducing death from war. 2. Left you more or less alone if you paid tribute and allowed trade. Plus he was way ahead of his time promoting within his military based on merit rather than bloodline. I'm more than happy to have never had met him, but from all I've read he seems like a much deeper character than how he's portrayed in the popular imagination. Davy Crockett. He gets initially recruited into the local state militia after a war with the Creek Indians breaks out. He ends up befriending them and becomes one of the strongest advocates for Native Americans during his time in the House of the Representatives. He sacrifices his political career over his opposition to the Indian Removal Act and then goes to Texas to fight at the Alamo. If you look at his short political career, he basically spent the entire time advocating against political elites. He truly seems like a genuine guy. Well, I think that the more you dig around and think about it, it's actually possible to find an angle on anybody who ever lived that makes them seem, as you say, a huge piece of shit. There are not, and never likely were, any true saints among us, so to speak, but there are people who aspired to great deeds and accomplished much in their lifetimes, did a lot of good, in spite of possibly being in some way a huge piece of shit. It is a part of being human, I think. Which we all are. I would wager the difference between the average person being regarded as a piece of shit and the average famous person being regarded as a piece of shit is that no one cares enough about the average regular person enough to go digging around in their private life. I'd worked retail for a number of years. Most people are petulant, bigoted, rageful, and self-entitled, and it really shows when you ask them to pay for a smartphone they voluntarily walked in to voluntarily buy. Reba McEntire. I used to wait tables in Vegas and she would come into the restaurant all the time when she was in town. She and those she surrounded herself with, her agent, assistant, etc., were all down to earth and humble people. Never had any issues, eventually got on a first name basis with her after a year of serving her and always looked forward to when she would come in. Truly one of the sweetest and kindest people I've met. William McKinley, U.S. President 1897-1901. He did much to increase American prosperity and quality of life, and was much beloved by the people. As an example of his character, after he got shot, he told the crowd to stop beating the guy who shot him, and, as he lay there in what must have been significant pain, was more concerned about how the news would be broken to his wife than with his own prognosis. Thurgood Marshall was the lead litigator for pretty much all of the most important civil rights cases of the 20th century, gained a seat on the Supreme Court where he worked to expand or, sadly just maintain those rights alongside rights for women. He left behind a massive legal theory and wistful quotes. Then, he was replaced by Clarence Thomas. Through conventions I have met several actors backstage who were amazing. Guy Steiner, the lieutenant from Allo Allo, and the guy telling Jack Sparrow he needs to pay to tie up at the dock. Don S. Davis, General Hammond. May he rest in peace. Jeremy Bulloch, the original Boba Fett. May he rest in peace. All were funny, personable, and just great people. Henry VIII. Largely remembered as a fat, horny old lech. His reign was unimaginably brutal. His brick with the Catholic Church wasn't about wanting a younger, sexier wife, it was about having a legal excuse to stamp out opposition and seize private property to fill his coffers. And the ways he stamped it out were every bit as cruel as the Holocaust. Alfred the Great really did earn his title. Introduced massive legal reforms, promoted education, expanded his kingdom and halted the Viking invasions mostly. Sure, his piety sometimes clouded his judgment, and he may have had an illegitimate son from some youthful impropriety, but compared to rulers at the time he was way ahead of his time. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She was the best monarch ever, with hardly a foot wrong. The only thing I can think that she did wrong was not to permit Charles to marry Camilla in the late 1970s, insisting that he married a virgin, Diana, in 1981. Other than that, Her Majesty was truly exemplary. John Adams refused to own slaves because he found it immoral, saw his wife as an equal, which was a rarity, and represented British troops in court because he believed everyone had a right to fair legal representation. I'm very critical of the Founding Fathers, but he was built different. Cyrus the Great in the end was probably not a piece of shit. Maybe the results of his legacy are problematic, but that was due to his non-piece of shitness, I think. If we didn't have Cyrus, we wouldn't have Alexander the Great, arguably we wouldn't have Christianity, maybe not even democracy. John Adams, founding father, but didn't own slaves. Treated his wife as an equal. Was a legal defense for the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre because everyone deserves a defense attorney. Sure, his presidency was rife with issues, but overall seemed like he was a good dude. Met Tiger Woods when I was 15. He slapped my hat out of my hand. A different golfer him I didn't know ran up, picked up my hat and asked if his signature would be okay. I agreed, but I don't know who he was or what his name was, but my grandpa was pleased upon seeing it. Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. Dude just wanted to farm in peace. Got called to be the dictator of Rome. He kicked ass and then he stepped down from absolute power to go back to his farm. He got called back in, he kicked ass, and he stepped down again. What a legend! Desmond Doss. Enlisted in the army in World War II and refused to carry a weapon on religious grounds. During the Pacific Campaign he was credited with saving over 75 people by dragging them out of active battle zones and back to safety while under enemy fire and artillery. Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. Rome is attacked. Senate appoints him dictator of Rome. Absolute power. Leads him to victory. Instead of holding power, resigns. Goes back to his modest farm life. Refuses to elaborate. Does this twice. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself becoming the villain. Mostly people that died young seem to not have turned into a piece of shit, and apart from that, maybe Dolly Parton in regards to people who actually are 75. Yo, I was the ass. I saw Don Cheadle at an airport and was thinking about Ocean's 11 and said to my friend, dude, it's Bernie Mac, and he looked back and said, no, I'm the other black guy from Ocean's 11, but at least you liked the movie. Theodore Roosevelt was generally regarded a pretty great guy. Started the National Parks program, broke up trusts and was progressive in his policies. Lived his principles and was well liked. No major scandals I'm aware of. Jimmy Carter. A terrible president, but a truly good person. Donated a lot of time to Habitat for Humanity. I will have to say he was the last good person to be president. Everyone after him so far has been self-serving. Bertrand Russell, pacifist philosopher. In 1950, Russell was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in recognition of his varied and significant writings in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He is an example for an authoritarian leader that used his power to wipe out stupid religious ideas inside the government and left in working democracy for his citizens after his death. Napoleon instituted a lot of reforms. He was better at playing European continent chess, until he wasn't. The victors at Waterloo besmirched his name. He wasn't Hitler. A man of his time, only more so. Erwin Rommel? Possibly. He was a competent military commander who was also mixed up in a plot to assassinate Hitler. But Erich von Manstein was probably the best German general. The Persians. Darius and Xerxes are just two examples from history. The Persian Empire was so good that in 90 of the area they were seen as liberators and not conquerors. I don't know if he should be completely absolved, but Benedict Arnold was constantly screwed over by the side he was on and he finally had enough of the bullshit. This thread is wild. Top 3 answers at the time of this posting are Nikola Tesla, Salma Hayek, and Marcus Aurelius. Quite a diverse cast to catch in this net. Trump hands down, on top of which he never paid my struggling son-in-law for a job he did for him even though he is supposedly worth millions. Kurt Vonnegut. I had to get in touch with him frequently for work at a non-profit for several years. He was never once even vaguely polite. I only know one thing about Jonas Salk, but that one thing is enough for me to consider him amongst the greatest people to have ever lived. Pablo Escobar. Seems weird that I have to point this out, but he's glorified by far too many people now. He killed thousands of people. Pablo Escobar. Seems weird that I have to point this out, but he's glorified by far too many people now. He killed thousands of people. Larry Zerner has always been good with fans and universally liked with his peers. Plus, he paved the way for Jason's hockey mask look. Every historical person, like us, was a flawed human being in many ways. To believe otherwise is mythology rather than history. Henry IV of France, who reigned from 1589 to 1610. He was known as Good King Henry. In France of all the places, Jesus. If his followers actually had stuck to the things he actually said and did, the entire world would be different. Trump. And the rest of that scambag-filled group of stiffs and hangover one called his family. Sound of disgusted spit. I really should have worded this better cause people are missing the point. I meant to say who was not a piece of shit. I hate this question. It presupposes that famous people are bad. Redditors encourage toxic thoughts enough as it is. Adolf Plot twist: the downvotes are from white supremacists who don't like me calling him Adolf instead of Führer. Mozart seems nice. All about the music. His letters make him seem childlike, if a little scatty. Pun intended. Jared Leto hit on my girlfriend at the time, and called me fat. His brother Shannon was super nice though. Marilyn Monroe. I've read a few of her bios and she was described as completely benevolent in nature. James Gandolfini was nice as hell, made it a point to come over and introduce himself. Genuinely. Jared Leto. I sat next to him on a flight from Monterrey, Mexico back in 2018. Absolute asshole. General Montgomery. He was a piece of shit, but apparently because he had Asperger's. Emperor Maximilian I. Great and progressive dude measured and compared to his era. George Burns. Funny as hell and a nice man, a little mischief didn't help either. Dolly Parton. Why is everybody answering with people who are pieces of shit? Mr. Rogers. Try to find one person who had a bad thing to say about him. Charles Dickens, who practiced what he preached about the impoverished. Edmund Hillary. That man was a pure heart if there ever was one. Chuck Berry. Dude was kinda fucked up to hookers he hired. Apparently Minnie Riperton was an amazing, sweet woman,